British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has defended his new Brexit plan to Parliament, but he's admitted that it's a compromise plan with the clock ticking down to the October 31st deadline, the deadline to leave the European Union.
They do not deliver everything we would have wished. They do represent a compromise, but to remain a prisoner of existing positions is to become a cause of deadlock rather than breakthrough. And so we have made a genuine attempt to bridge the chasm, to reconcile the apparently irreconcilable, and to go the extra mile as time runs short.
Speaking in Parliament just a short while ago, he outlined his new proposal, which focuses on maintaining an open border between the UK's Northern Ireland and EU member Ireland, a key sticking point to a Brexit deal. Mr Johnson added that his government had gone the extra mile in the hope of getting a deal before the end of this month.
But he admitted that the UK and the EU are still way off a resolution. Now, for more on this, let's cross over to Ollie Barrett in London. Ollie, help us understand what Mr Johnson meant when he said that the plan was a compromise.
Well, one way that the UK government feels that it is compromising is by saying that Northern Ireland can stay in Europe's single market for goods. That is something that has been added to British proposals in the last few days. And Boris Johnson clearly feels that that and other issues do mean that Britain is making efforts to compromise with the European Union. That will mean that there are, in effect, two borders which are being suggested by Britain at a time when it was trying to avoid even one hard border. But the UK government says both of those borders between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, will be soft borders. Boris Johnson insisting again in the House of Commons earlier that any customs checks that will need to take place as a result of the deal that he is proposing will be away from the border. They won't be intrusive, they won't consist of significant infrastructure, and therefore that the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, in his view, can remain open and free-flowing and not something that jeopardises the peace process. So while not all of these proposals are necessarily going to go down well in Ireland, and we've had some pretty sceptical responses from Dublin already, as I say, the UK government does feel that it is making compromises and that now it's the turn for Dublin and European capitals to do the same.
Ollie, there really isn't very much time before that October 31st deadline, 28 more days or so. Now Boris Johnson's headed to Brussels to pitch that deal. It seems that the EU doesn't really agree with it, though.
That's right. At this point, the European Union is saying that it will look at the deal, it will be objective, and it will consider the British proposals, and that also it has questions for the UK about some of the ideas that are being suggested. The key question here is whether the European Union is saying all of that just so it doesn't appear to be rejecting Boris Johnson's proposals out of hand and then can reject them in a few days' time, or is the European Union genuinely going to see enough in these plans from Britain to sit down and have some very detailed negotiations indeed? That very much remains to be seen at this point. Some deep scepticism in Brussels, but also other European capitals about what Boris Johnson is proposing. But he will try and make his case to European leaders to put pressure on negotiators in Brussels to come round to his way of thinking. Also interesting that in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson has been striking a much more centrist, amenable, friendly tone to opposition MPs than has been the case in recent weeks. That, you would expect, is because he believes there is the chance now of getting a majority for his deal in the House of Commons. And if he can demonstrate that to the European Union, there might be some European leaders who are more inclined to work on the outline of the deal that Boris Johnson is proposing.
It very much seems like Brussels or bust for Boris Johnson right now. Ollie, thank you very much for that update. That was Ollie Barrett there in London.